Good morning, biology students. I hope you're enjoying your Wednesday. What I want to do is just give you a little bit of information to kind of help you with what you're going to work on today, and a little bit of instruction on this idea of natural selection so that we're all on the same page and know what's happening. So I'm going to do a little bit of instruction here with you. There is a slide deck that you can look at to kind of walk you through how to do some explanations. And you're going to definitely want to watch this natural selection video so that you can do these adaptation explanations. And then for homework, you're going to do some pre-reading on niche partitioning. So then tomorrow we'll be able to look at these niches, and we'll do some work with some niche partitioning here in class, looking at the African savanna and some examples that go with that. So I'm going to give you a quick update on and just kind of review what we looked at yesterday. And then we'll talk a little bit about these explanations. So when we were in class yesterday, we looked at some key data with our adaptations and how they're affecting survival. So these are some summary notes that we took where we were answering this question. So we've been working on this with both our mice and with our finches. So the summary data that's here is dealing more with the finch data, where we're looking at kind of how the finches have worked together. So we've got the idea that there were environmental factors changing. So the environmental factors changing had to do with the drought during that year of 1977 and the fact that there was not as much rain. And so due to that, we also saw our finch population going down. After the drought, we did see in our finch population that the beaks got larger. And the reason that we saw that is that during the drought, a lot of finch died. And as they died, it was because they weren't able to get enough food. Water would be part of it, but it was more along the lines of the food that the finch were not able to get. And because what was happening was that the seeds after the drought, the ones that survived the drought, were harder to break. Because they were harder to break, these finch with the smaller beak depths couldn't break them. And so those finch died and could not reproduce. So with no food, then they could not survive. Which means that they don't reproduce. So then we lose this trait of the smaller beak depth. Okay, the finch are not choosing to get larger beak. It's just that those that have the larger beak are able to eat the seeds that are harder, so they survive. The ones that had about the 7.3 and smaller are the ones that were dying off when you looked at your data. Remember that you can go back to your graph, so I'll show you that in a second. But this is still just kind of a summary of all of that we were looking at. Ultimately, the food becomes limited, and only the birds that can eat the larger, tougher seeds are able to survive and reproduce. So then we see a shift in our population of ground finch. We also see a shift in the population of seeds. Okay? Because the seeds that were harder and bigger are the ones that are surviving, not the seeds that were smaller and softer because of the rain. So this plant that had the harder seeds was the plant that was able to survive the drought. All right? So after we got done with that, we kind of summarized this idea of natural selection. And as you watch the video from the Amoeba Sisters, pay attention to these kinds of ideas. So what I want you to listen for is some of the things that when they talk about this idea of selective pressure and that some of the population survives, the idea that those that have the beneficial adaptation are the ones that are surviving and reproducing, and that the beneficial trait shows in the population. Okay? Notice that it's the ones with this beneficial adaptation. It has to be present in the population. They don't just get it because they need it. Okay? It has to be inherited. and it's then passed on to the offspring that way. Okay? As you did your reading through section 18.2, you looked at these different types of selection that can happen. So we recalled with our mice that we were seeing a directional selection, that after the lava flow we were seeing more dark mice than we did before the lava flow. So that was an example of directional selection, along with the beaks of the birds was also a directional selection, where our initial population had more of the small beaks. After the drought, we have more with the larger beaks. So both of those are directional. They're just in different directions the way that I have this drawn. The other two types, as you read through them, were the stabilizing selection. We used the example, if you look at the slide deck, that of the robin's eggs, where robins lay about 4 eggs is their average number of eggs, and it's almost always 4. If it's fewer, there's not enough that survive, and when it's more, they can't feed them. So it stabilizes, it stays right here in the middle. And then we also had this idea of disruptive selection. So with an example of brown and white rabbits, where we see the brown rabbits are able to survive, or the white rabbits are able to survive, but these guys here in the middle that are kind of that in-between color don't really survive. They can't survive in the summer, and they get eaten by the fox, or in the winter, they get eaten by the fox. So this tan color is always eaten, where the ones that are brown can survive in the brown environment of the summers, and the ones that are white survive in the winter environment. So depending on when they're reproducing. Okay? So really what I want you to think about as you're kind of working through writing your explanations today is this idea of natural selection. Okay? And this idea that there's really these 4 key parts. There's a selective pressure, the ones that have the beneficial adaptation survive, that it has to be present, and it's inherited. Okay? So that beneficial trait is what's going to show up in a population because there's a benefit to having it over another trait. And so we see these different types of shifts. All right? So you're going to use that information to continue your work here. This is the slides that I was mentioning to you, and this does go through some of the selective pressures that are in there. But what I want you to do today is to look at what your adaptations are that you have. Okay, so in class, you may or may not have watched this Amoeba Sisters video. You're going to watch that video. It's linked on the agenda also. You're not going to be able to do the partner work. These are some examples of natural selection where we see this different variation in the individuals. The ones that fit the environment survive, and then the new generations show that variation more frequently. Okay, this is kind of like what we did with the mice. Here's your different types of selection that I was just talking about. So again, make sure that you're comfortable with all 3 different types and how those show up in populations. And so what you guys are going to do now is on your classroom, there's this assignment, the adaptations explanation. And when you open that up, it will look like this. And so underneath the data analysis, I would like you to summarize both the activity from the niches, or the finch. Okay, so you're going to reflect on the data that you observed in the finch and in the mouse simulations and or the rabbit simulations, depending on which class you're in. You have slightly different simulations that you looked at. But what you're seeing here is you're going to summarize the data. So this is your evidence. You can pull the graphs back up. So remember that the graphs are in your, you can open up this adaptations in a population again, and you have all the graphs that are there in the document. They're linked. Underneath where it says graphs, you guys have looked at those a couple times. And so you can get some more evidence from there. You can look at your timeline to get evidence because you guys summarized all of those graphs into your timelines. And then you can also go back and look at your simulation from last week that you did either with the mice and or the rabbits. Okay, so this is for your evidence, your data. You're then going to write a claim. Remember that a claim is going to answer the question. All right, so you're going to answer the question here. And when you answer this question, you're going to answer the question using this question up here. How will adaptations within a population change due to environmental changes? So write one sentence answer. And then this is why. So this is getting into the idea of reasoning. So why do you think that that's true using this evidence in your answer for why? So think about the scientific information that we talked about, that you saw in the video, the information that I gave you here at the beginning, and the information that you've read in your textbook, and give me your why. Finally, then, what you're going to do is do this application, okay, where neither of these live in isolation. The animals all live with other animals around them. They live in ecosystems that have other biological things and abiological things, so biotic and abiotic factors. So here's an example of 4 different species of finch that live with the medium ground finch. And so what I want you to think about is what are some of the differences, and then how can having these different types of finch contribute to stability in the whole ecosystem. So the ecosystem is all the living and the non-living things. Okay? So that's the assignment for today, is thinking about those, watching the video, and looking at that. You do have a homework assignment. Okay, and so the homework assignment will be to look at this idea of niche partitioning. It's getting you ready for the conversation and the work that we'll do tomorrow and continue into Friday. So the homework assignment will be, the homework assignment is niche partitioning. Okay, it'll be here at the top. It will look like this when you open it up, and you'll do just a little bit of reading. You've got a graph to look at, and then a couple of questions to answer based on what you read and the data that's there. When you look at this, there is a quick little video that you can watch around that. It also gives you some ideas of different types of niche partitioning that these could be being explained by, and then these last 2 questions that are here. Okay, so if you get stuck, let me know. I know it seems like a lot, but it really shouldn't be. You're just really thinking about what have we been working on this last week and a half with the mice and the finch, kind of wrapping into this idea of natural selection and how organisms have these adaptations, which are traits that help them to survive over others within their same population, and then that gives us a shift in the population, which then can lead to evolution. Okay, so if you have questions, let me know, and I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you on the next day. All right.